early April of 2025, my wife, Rachel, dad, and I, Evan, went back to our property, 40 acres in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. We had a warm weather window in the 50s for a few days, so we took advantage and drove up to get some work done on the cabin. The snowmelt and some rain made the drive in a little scary, braving deep puddles and mud, but we made it in and got a first look at the property without a ton of snow, still some snow. One of the really cool things about this property is that it's about 600 feet from where you can park to where the cabin site is, and it actually crosses two branches of the creek on the way in. The previous owner built some boardwalk to get across, which is fantastic. It does mean that any and all materials need to be hauled that 600 feet across the river, but the seclusion of being away from the car makes it all worthwhile. I think it adds to the sense of just kind of being away from it all. We could also hear a small waterfall from a beaver pond from the boardwalk, which was just wonderful. We had a few plans for this trip: insulate the floor, lay down some plywood subfloor, install the vinyl flooring. We also needed to install the wood stove and chimney as the nights were still pretty cold. We also hoped to be able to inventory more of the left behind items on the property and hopefully start to clean up the enormous amount of stuff scattered all over our land. After getting some stuff hauled into the cabin site, we were able to finally do a bit of, I don't know if you can really call it inventory. Mostly it was just realizing the scope of the mess that we had to deal with. Now again, keep in mind, you cannot get a car or a truck back here. Everything has to be hauled out in trash bags across the creek. No easy task. The winter of 2024 and 2025 in Michigan was a very heavy snowfall year, making it one of the snowiest for the last 5+ years, I believe. The previous owner listed this property for sale in September, so everything here sat from September to now, which is April. The tents all snapped poles and collapsed, tarps ripped or broke, plywood tables warped, and things were kind of just left everywhere. There's really very little salvageable from outside. Both the tents were full of a few inches of water, and anything sitting on the floor was just soaked for months. The melting snow also revealed a pretty huge amount of trash as well. Wrappers, boxes, trash bags, bottles. It's definitely a mess, and we have our work cut out for us. There was still a decent amount of snow on stuff, so we still couldn't really pull these off. I know it only looks like a little bit, but that was pretty much solid ice on top of that, so there was kind of no moving that. But we were able to kind of see inside and realize, like, oh, there's a bed frame and an air mattress and a blanket, just a whole bunch of stuff in there. Honestly, the melting snow kind of just made everything look worse, but hey, at least now it was out in the open and we could see what we were dealing with. The first big project that we wanted to do to the cabin was to insulate and finish the floor, which would also allow us to install the stove and finally move stuff into the cabin. Now, one thing about not starting from the ground up on a project is that you have to work around what somebody else did before you. The cabin did technically have subfloor, which was just nailed off to the floor joists, but there was no insulation and no easy way to add it with all the walls sitting on top of the floor already. Also, the shape of the subfloor and the gaps were pretty incredible. You could see right down to the ground, so this really needed to be fixed. From a couple different YouTube channels, Kyle's Cabin and Off-Grid Homesteading with Boss of the Swamp, I got this idea to use Reflectix insulation. Now, since there's already a subfloor, we marked where the floor joists were on the bottom plate of the walls, and then rolled out the insulation. Next, we nailed off these 1/2-inch strips on top of the joists and the Reflectix. This creates a small air gap and doesn't just squish the Reflectix between two pieces of plywood, giving it its insulating properties. Here I am lining up a few of these strips and cutting them with the circular saw and the generator. Just a side note, I love working off the generator out in the woods. It's a pretty cool way to get stuff done. On top of these strips, then the 3/4 inch plywood subfloor gets screwed in. I think this should provide plenty of insulation, plus make the floor much more rigid than it was previously. I know that the Reflectix doesn't really seem like much, but a lot of cabin builders seem to use it with great success. This then gave us a solid insulated subfloor to install the vinyl flooring. I put down just a thin layer of underlayment just to give it a little bit more cushion and sound deadening over top of the plywood. I went with vinyl flooring because it's easy, it's waterproof, it's fairly scratch resistant, and it's quite inexpensive. This cabin's gonna get pretty heavy boot traffic and dog traffic, so I think vinyl's a great option. I also went with this off-wood color, as pretty much everything else in this cabin is gonna be some type or some shade of wood. Then we could finally get to installing the wood stove. I sawzalled a nice hole in the side of my cabin, and then we cut 2 circular holes in some sheet metal for the Class A insulated stove pipe to pass through. One on the inside and one on the outside. A bit of framing and a lot of fiddling around with pipe fittings, and we had the stovepipe installed. Okay, let me be honest here. I had a pretty hard time with this stovepipe. There aren't really any instructional videos that I could find. Content creators seem to just assume that you know how it all goes together. The videos from the manufacturers are more or less useless. Asking someone who works at a Menards, that just yielded way too many discussions of following code for my off-grid cabin and my budget. What I ended up doing in the end was just going into Menards and essentially constructing the chimney right there in the aisle. Now for my research, I'm confident in one thing. Male end goes down unless you want creosote drips. From there, I just traced that into this Class A pipe through a 45-degree elbow. In order for this to work, it needed this adapter, which I had not originally bought. Then on the other side of the Class A pipe on the outside of the building, the male end of the next 45-degree elbow could fit into that pipe, which we also screwed in, and so on and so forth up to the chimney cap. Building it this way in the aisle made it so that we got the stovepipe and chimney safely and correctly installed. Honestly though, even then, snapping the single wall stovepipe together and fitting everything, drilling in the damper, it's all pretty fiddly. It seemed like nothing wanted to fit together, then all of a sudden it would just drop in place and then be impossible to take apart. Honestly, I'm really glad the stove is now permanently installed, so I don't need to faff around with it anymore. One thing to mention here is why I'm running the stovepipe out the side of the building and not up out of the roof. I think honestly the first reason is you don't have to cut a hole in your roof. It's going to be a little bit easier to waterproof it. And the other reason is there's going to be a loft above this stove in the back corner, and I didn't really want to run it all the way up through the loft and then up through the roof as well, so I just decided to run it out of the side of the building and then stick the stovepipe up over the roof. With the stove and the floor done, we were able to just relax and enjoy the property a bit in the evening. We also had our first comfortable night in the cabin with the wood stove keeping us warm, and we really started to see the potential of the place. The following day, I got to work cutting and peeling some logs for the loft. I want to use logs from the property for the loft floor joists and ladder, as the whole rest of the cabin is just dimensional lumber. We also did some more cleanup around the property. You may have noticed this toilet in some other clips. This was one of the other really valuable items left behind in a collapsed tent. This is a Sunmar composting toilet. Now, I had always intended to just dig a hole and have a traditional outhouse, but since this is here, we're going to just build the outhouse building around this composting toilet instead. I took my Sawzall to this subfloor overhang as well. This also really has me scratching my head. I don't understand how there can be overhang here, since I'm sure the subfloor went down before the walls, and usually you would cut the subfloor off right at the foundation so that it doesn't overhang. At any rate, it was collecting snow and water and just allowing it to sit against the bottom plate and subfloor, so it definitely had to go. Since I didn't really have the materials to do anything else, I just laid a layer of Tyvek tape over this edge that I just cut on all sides of the cabin, just so that at the very least it'll be much more waterproof than it was before with the overhang. Once I get siding figured out, I can make this better. Day 2 wrapped up pretty uneventfully, but that was all about to change. Overnight, we got some thunderstorms and heavy rain. While it was enjoyable for a few minutes, it quickly became less fun when I felt a drip on my face from inside the cabin. Some frantic searching around with a flashlight in the middle of the night revealed water dripping in from almost the entire tall side of the cabin's roof. We frantically set up buckets, towels, pans, mugs, and anything else that we could to catch water and just hoped that it wouldn't keep raining as hard. Our original plan was to leave first thing the next morning, since we've got pets and work to get back to. But with the roof disaster the night before, we needed to figure out what, if anything, we could do to prevent more water from coming into the cabin until we could get back up there, which was to be in 2 weeks at the minimum. I flew the drone up and got my first real look at this roof, and wow. From what I could see from the air, the roof was bad. It was all plastic, and being very kind, I would say that it was put up in a bit of a rush. I also mentioned in the first video how there was no overhang on the roof at all. Well, it was actually worse than that. The roof actually started a good 3 inches back from the 2x4 top plate in the front of the cabin. Getting up on a ladder, it was even worse. Behind this gap, there's just a mess of Tyvek tape, screws, nails, and great ropes of silicone thrown up as just a prayer to waterproof the whole thing. There were inch-tall gaps in the front that were completely open to water getting in, and it was pretty darn obvious right away why we had water coming into the cabin last night in the rainstorm. Also, just the whole skylight concept. I get that it's nice in theory, lets in lots of light, but there's a really good reason that you don't see skylights on cabin builds or even a lot of houses. Unless you spend a ton of money, they are very hard to keep watertight, and this one was definitely not watertight. Again, great in theory, but absolutely terrible execution. A bad combination of needing to leave pretty quickly and just a complete lack of materials. I thanked all the gods, old and new, that I had brought a 20x20 tarp with me on this trip. As quickly as we could, we pulled the tarp over the entire roof and nailed it off with Tyvek siding nails. Yeah, it's not perfect, but as long as the tarp stays on the cabin, it'll be dry. Feeling better about the roof situation with the tarp on it, we tucked important things under another tarp and then did the final walkthrough of the cabin before heading back downstate. With the floor done, the stove in, a little table and chairs moved in, it was starting to look so much better. Now, the roof was definitely a known issue, but now at least we know that we'd have a brand new roof before we got too far into our build. But all that aside, the cabin was really starting to feel like home, and the more we added to it and fixed it up, the more like ours it really started to feel. The potential was there, and it was becoming easier and easier to see. The land was even slowly starting to get cleaned up from all the trash left behind. We had plans to replace the roof, and it was still only early April. Next time up to the property, we race rainy weather to replace the roof. But before we can even do that, we have a flood disaster that nearly derails our plans entirely. Well, that part of it is just floating. I genuinely don't know what we're going to do. God.